he laid something on my heart, something that I wanted to talk about tonight, and it's going to be kind of different. It's going to be kind of funny. It's based on a Bible character, a character in the Bible. I want to look at Genesis chapter 10, and we'll be looking at a couple of the verses there. I want to think about something. Think about the fact that after the flood, all the people of the world descended from Noah, his family, his three sons, and their family. Think about all the people in the world descended from them right there. After the flood, God told them to go out, be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth. And that's what they did, right? That's what they did. And so all the descendants of the earth came from this group right here. Noah's three sons, Shem's descendants became the Hebrews, became the Jews. They also went all through Syria, all through the Middle East. It's also through Shem that the line of Christ continued. Ham descendants are that of North Africa, the Far East. And then you got Japheth. Japheth's descendants were pretty much Europe and Indonesia. Chapter 10, what I want to look at tonight, gives us a broad picture of the descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth being scattered. Gives them a picture of being scattered, of exactly kind of what happened, after the flood, after God told them to be fruitful and multiply. So that's what they did. They kind of scattered out. They kind of scattered. Chapter 11, which we won't look at tonight, we'll look at next Wednesday. Chapter 11 gives the details of why they scattered. We'll look at that next Wednesday night. But tonight, as we look at Genesis chapter 10, we realize that all these people, God gave a name, and that name was important, right? In the Bible, names were important, wasn't it? And these people made an impact on the world one way or another. They made an impact on the world. In one way or another, they left a legacy. Same thing with us, right? Same thing with us. We make a legacy. We make an impression, on the world one way or another with how we live, how we act, how people see us. We make an impression one way or another. We make an impact on the world one way or another. I want to look at the story of Nimrod. I want to look at the story of Nimrod tonight. Who knows? Does everybody know who Nimrod is? Everybody know who Nimrod? Everybody knows who he is? Nimrod. Does anybody? Well, y'all probably don't know what his name means. His name, I won't give it away just yet. The name has actually changed a couple of times throughout history. His name has changed a couple of times throughout history. One reason his name changed was because of Bugs Bunny. One reason his name, the meaning of his name changed was because of Bugs Bunny. In one of the first Bugs Bunny cartoons, Bugs Bunny called Elmer Fudd, he called him Nimrod. In one of the first Bugs Bunny cartoons. Called him a Nimrod. In that one moment, Bugs Bunny inadvertently changed what everybody thought about Nimrod. Because everybody thought that Bugs Bunny was calling Elmer Fudd pretty much an idiot, pretty much calling him, a derogatory name. But that showed that they didn't know that Nimrod came from the Bible. That's where the writers of Bugs Bunny, they were calling Nimrod, because Nimrod in the Bible was actually he's actually called one of the great hunters. He's a great hunter, a mighty hunter. And so this biblical figure, Nimrod, he was a great hunter. And so Nimrod, Bugs Bunny was calling Nimrod, he was calling him a great hunter. But people didn't catch the joke. They didn't catch the sarcasm there. They didn't catch it. And so they assumed that Nimrod meant idiot or something like that. So after that, the meaning kind of stuck. And it's kind of remained that way. So when you call somebody a Nimrod, it's not a good thing to be called. It wasn't a good thing to be called, right? You probably don't hear too many people saying that these days, though, do you?
Oh, they say worse.
Yeah, I know it's got a lot worse. But so the meaning of the name has remained that way ever since that. The dictionary says this, that the name Nimrod means a simpleton or a nerd, pretty much. So is Nimrod something that we should want to be or not? That's my question. I think that it would be wise of us to avoid being a Nimrod. Being a Nimrod. Let's look at the book of Genesis this evening, and we're going to look at what I call the second set of begats. This is the second set of begats in the book of Genesis. The first begats were in Genesis chapter 5, and it outlined the descendants of Adam and Eve. This is the second set of begats, and it outlines the descendants of Noah's three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And this is where we're going to hear about Nimrod. So let's look at our scripture this evening. Genesis chapter 10, and it's verses 6 through 12. Genesis chapter 10, verses 6 through 12. This is what the Bible tells us. It says, the descendants of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. The descendants of Cush were Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Rama, and Sabteca. The descendants of Rama were Sheba and Dedan. Okay? I know that's all very interesting right there. Listen to this. We're getting to this good part. Cush was also the ancestor of Nimrod, who was the first heroic warrior on the earth. He was the first heroic warrior on the earth. And since he was the greatest hunter in the world at that time, his name became proverbial. His name became proverbial. People would say, this man is like Nimrod, the greatest hunter in the world. He built his kingdom in the land of Babylonia, with the cities of Babylon, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh. From there, he expanded his territory to Assyria, building the cities of Nineveh. He built the city of Nineveh, Rehoboth, Calah, and Rezin, the great city located between Nineveh and Calah. So that's a pretty interesting passage right there. And there's a lot of really good stuff in that passage in there. But this tells us about Nimrod. This is basically tells us about Nimrod, his basics. What's one thing that sets really people apart from each other? What's one thing that sets us apart that nobody could ever, no matter what, nobody could ever take away from you?
What people think of.
What people think of you? Something else? Something else. What's one thing that people cannot take away from you, no matter what? It's personal, it belongs to you. Personality. Your name.
Oh, yeah.
Your name. People, no matter what, they can't take that away from you, right? It's your name. It's the name you've been given. They can call you names, but, they can't change your name. Only you can change your name. Your name. It's how we are identified. So names are important. Names were a lot more important in the Bible, right? Back in those days, names were very, very important. They meant something. Nimrod's name meant something. Nimrod's name meant to rebel. His name meant to rebel. And so guess what he did? He lived up to his name. He became rebellious. And he rebelled against God. He became rebellious. So all throughout this chapter, and just like in this list that we just saw, we get name after name after name. We see all these names. And so if names were not important, God wouldn't give us all these names, right? He wouldn't throw those in here just for our knowledge if they weren't important. Names are important. It's important to God. So in this passage, we see these names, right? And then all of a sudden we get down, and all of a sudden Nimrod is singled out. Why is he singled out? Why is Nimrod singled out in this passage? When I was doing the research, when I was looking this stuff up, a lot of scholars were saying, he was singled out because of his name. Because his name was important.
His name and his attitude sort of went together, didn't it?
It did. It really did. And that's why I think that it was singled out. It was because of, we won't necessarily get into it all tonight, but we'll see that his rebelliousness is what, really sets him apart. And it kind of, that's kind of why I believe God singles him out.
I have a question.
Okay.
So he's a mighty hunter / rebellious?
Yes. He's a mighty hunter, but he as we're going to see, he's very rebellious. He has.
So does his meaning change because of what he did, or did he do what he did because of his name change?
That's a good question.
Okay.
That's a good question. Did they name him that way because they knew eventually that he was going to do that? I don't know.
Before that.
Indians used to give people names for when they saw him do something. Hey, he chases bear chases him. So when the Indians saw that, they would, that, and so maybe they knew. Oh, okay, he's rebellious out from the beginning. We're going to name this kid Nimrod. But I believe he's singled out because he becomes extremely rebellious against God. He is going to actually walk away from the faith of his family. Noah and his three sons were, they were very faithful people. Because how do we know they were faithful?
God didn't include anybody else on that boat.
That's right. Exactly. That's exactly what I was looking for. They got, God saved them, on the ark. So we know they were faithful. Noah, his wife, his three sons, and their wives, and that was it. So there were some faithful people. And so here comes Nimrod, Noah's grandson, He's going to walk away from his faith. Now, look at verse 9 once again. So it says, since he was the greatest hunter in the world, his name became proverbial. That means that his name became, great. And people would say, this man is like Nimrod, the greatest hunter in the world. So at first, there for a while, people would say, oh man, you're like Nimrod, you're like a great hunter. People would say that you're great. And so if it was up to Nimrod, he would want to be known as a great hunter and a great warrior. That's the way he would want to be remembered. If it was up to him, he would want to be remembered for his heroic actions. But instead, now if he would have left it at that, that would have been great, but he didn't leave it at that. So instead, now he is known for being rebellious. He's known for being rebellious. He's rebellious against God. Think about all the heroes before Nimrod. What happened to all them?
Most of them drowned.
They all drowned. They all got washed off the face of the earth. All the previous heroes and famous warriors before Nimrod, they all drowned pretty much. They all died.
So did the giants.
And so did the giants.
In fact, I think that flood was sort of geared toward getting rid of them anyway.
Right. Somehow they lived on. The spirit of those giants lived on.
Their attitudes.
Yeah, right. And so all the heroes, all the great warriors before Nimrod, they all passed away. They all died. And here comes Nimrod. What's happened to all the heroes and the great warriors since Nimrod? They've all passed away and died, right? Except for one. All the heroes and all the great warriors are all still in the grave, except for one. Jesus. All except for Christ. All other heroes, including Nimrod, still in the grave. Still in the grave. So I believe that God is giving us an example here. Nimrod is being offered as an example of how this one man thought that he was greater than God, thought that he was greater than others, and he rebels against God. And God has to show him who's truly greater. God has to show him who truly is greater. Because, like I said, he ends up in the same place that every other hero, every other person, every other person that ever lived. And so he thought of himself as greater than God. He thought of himself as a great hunter, a great warrior. He thought of himself as a great builder too, and we'll talk about that next time. But he thought of himself as a great builder. That people initially looked up to and said, hey, you're like Nimrod. He's great. This guy, you're like Nimrod. And so people initially looked up to him. And so Nimrod was content with making a name for himself. And that's what he wanted to do. That's exactly what he wanted to do. He wanted to make a name for himself. And that's what he was out to do, make a name for himself. He cared nothing about the faith of his family. He cared nothing about the faith of his family they had before him. Nimrod made quite a name for himself on the earth. Made a name for himself. Not a name for God. He didn't do things for God. He didn't do things for his faith. He didn't try to make a name for himself. So Nimrod is an example of a very selfish person. Very selfish person. Whose desire was to prove that he did not have to depend on God. He thought that he didn't need God. He thought that he didn't have to depend on God for, prospering. He thought that he could do all this stuff by himself. He was sure that he was going to be greater than God. He was sure that he was going to be greater, and he was going to do everything that he could to make himself great, to make himself known, to make his name known, and to make sure that if there was ever another flood, that he was going to survive it. But we know that there was not going to be another flood, right? How do we know there was not going to be another flood?
God promised.
The promise. God promised that there would never be another flood, right? Not a great one like that. So Nimrod is trying to make himself known. He's trying to set himself up with this great kingdom, trying to set everything up. And so, rather than replenishing the earth with a bunch of faithful people and trying to, replenish the earth, as part of God's kingdom, he's trying to replenish the earth with his own kingdom. And he's trying to make his kingdom great. And so Nimrod is focused on building his own kingdom. His own kingdom. And ruling over his own domain. He wants to make it large and prosperous as possible. And what a kingdom it was. Nimrod's kingdom was great. Nimrod was the founder of a city called Babylon. He's the founder of Babylon. He builds Babylon. And we've heard about Babylon a couple of different places in the Bible, don't we? We hear about that in a couple of different places. We also hear about the city of Babylon in the book of Revelation toward the end times. Babylon and the surrounding areas is now modern day Iraq. And Nimrod is the one who built that city and built that area. And so all these cities that Nimrod is building, he's building pagan cities, pagan nations, and building it up for pagan idols and pagan worship. He's not building it up for God.
Even Saddam Hussein decided to rebuild Babylon.
He sure did.
And he had his picture put on buildings, etched in stone.
He rebuilt Babylon. He rebuilt the Nebuchadnezzar's palace. And in God's word, after the kingdom, after that palace was destroyed, God said, you will not rebuild this, on this spot. And he did. And you see what happened to him. So Nimrod was a person whose main, objective, his ambition, his desire, and purpose in life was to be greater than God. He said, I can be greater than God. I can make it to where I have so much money. I have so much stuff. I have so many people around me that I can survive anything. And I can beat God. He was never satisfied, though. He was never satisfied. Those who make pleasure, those who make power, those who make money their main objective, their main desire, they're never satisfied, are they? They're never satisfied. Because what do they need more of? They need more money. They need more power. They need more wealth. They need just a little bit more. How much is enough? I don't know, just a little bit more. They're never satisfied. Because the things of this world do not satisfy. The things of this world do not satisfy. Only God and His kingdom satisfies. The things of God satisfy. Nimrod is not content with what he established there. So he goes on. He goes over to Assyria. And he starts building more cities. He's building more cities. He's building his kingdom even further. He's building the cities of Nineveh. Remember the city of Nineveh? From the story of Jonah? What did Jonah say about the city of Nineveh?
I ain't going nowhere.
I ain't going over there. Why?
I don't like them folks.
They don't like them folks because they were evil. They were evil people. I ain't going over there. They were evil people. And that's how they got started. They were evil people because that's how Nimrod designed and built the city of Nineveh. They built the city of Nineveh and Rehoboth, Calah, and Rezin. He built all these as pagan cities. These cities became worship centers for pagan gods and deities. And so a lot of human sacrifices were going on. A lot of immorality was going on in these cities. You know, rampant immorality, rampant, debauchery, just everything unimaginable was going on in these cities. If you think about it, like I said, Nimrod, if he would have just stuck with being a great warrior and a great king and a good hunter, if he would have just stuck with that, he'd have been all right. But that wasn't good enough for him. It wasn't good enough for him. If he would have just stuck with the faith of his family, he'd have been set, he'd have been good. But he walked away from his faith. He didn't just rebel against it, he walked away from it. He wouldn't have any part of it. He was living up to his name. His family, if we think about it, had found grace, and they had found mercy in the eyes of the Lord, and the Lord had found them faithful and saved them. But here's Nimrod, grandson, Noah. He's trying to do things on his own. He's trying to prove things on his own. Trying to do everything on his own. That's his ambition, to make a name for himself. What are people these days trying to do? They try to make a name for themselves, don't they? We see people all over the world trying to make a name for themselves, trying to build large churches, trying to build, their selves up, things around them. Financial giants, sports people, entertainment people. They're trying to make a name for themselves and build themselves up. And a lot of those people are really out of touch with reality, aren't they? Think about, a lot of the celebrities that we hear about. Man, they're just, really out there. You think they were always that way? I don't think so.
They started out just like we did.
They started out as normal people, just like we did, and all of a sudden, all this fame and money, and trying to strive to be, to be more than what you are and what God designed us to be. It messes with them. There's a doctor that's getting made fun of right now because There's a doctor that's saying that it's demonic spirits that mess with people in the world today. There's demonic spirits. And guess what? The world's laughing at that doctor. Demonic spirits are real.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. People don't want to believe it though. And they're laughing and mocking that doctor. But demonic spirits are real. And they mess with people each and every day. What did King Saul in the Bible, what happened to him a lot? Had an evil spirit that messed with him a lot, didn't it?
Drove him crazy.
Drove him absolutely crazy. What's wrong with a lot of people in the world today? Evil spirits driving them crazy.
I just got chill bumps all over my body because I have known since I was a little girl, you do not challenge God for any reason whatsoever. And you can let stuff go on you and you just don't want to be like, gotta be bigger than God.
Right. That's right.
That's a dangerous place to try to be.
That's right. That's right. And so, just like in the story that, the story of Nimrod, and we'll look at, what happens to, the city. Look at that next Wednesday night. What happens, as we look at his legacy that he is leaving himself for himself. So, the kind of thing that he gives us an example of is that the legacy, the way that we live, the way that we talk, the way that we act is very important. It makes an impact one way or another. It's going to make an impact one way or another on folks. What kind of legacy do we want to live or leave with people? What kind of legacy or what kind of impact do we want to make around people? What kind of impact do we want to make? Like I said, Nimrod had a great start. He had a great start. Man, he had a great heritage. He had, a great family that he came from, a great faithful family. And here he is. All of a sudden, the first thing that's said about him, he is the first, heroic warrior on the earth. The very first heroic warrior on the earth. Man, that's something great to be said.
But he let it go to his head.
He did. He let it go to his head. He did. And that's pride. That pride went right to his head. And he let it eat him up. He let it eat him up. And that's his legacy. That's his legacy. Do we want our names? Do we want the things that we want to be remembered for? Do we want to be just a blot in history? Or do we want our names to be remembered for something? Do we want to make an impact for something? Don't we want to be remembered for something? When we're no longer here, don't we want our friends and our loved ones to say, great things about us? Or do we want them to have to make things up about us at our funeral just to be able to say something good about us? We want them to be able to say something great. That we made an impact, that we made a great impact right where we're planted, because God plants us here. God leads us here. God plants us here where we are. God plants us where we are to make an impact around us. Let's leave a great legacy. As individuals and as a church, let's leave a great legacy. Anything else?
Can we try to play that song after we're not live anymore?
Yeah,
You know what song I'm talking about?
it was,
Am I calling one?